Okay, so The Matrix Resurrections. I think we both have a lot to say about this movie. I've recently seen the trilogy about 2 months ago,
Mhm.
and you just saw the trilogy, in fact, so it's really fresh in your mind. We're gonna actually go and get into spoilers, so I'm just gonna throw that out there. So if anyone's not seen the movie,
Lots of spoilers.
lots, lots of spoilers. So, Anton, I guess we'll start with you. What do you feel was good about the movie?
So to preface this, I going into the movie, I heard that it was not very good, like overall. But at the same time, I'm not like a giga fan of the Matrix, and I've also haven't seen the Matrix trilogy in its entirety, and whatever I did see was a long time ago, so I have no memory of what happened before. So going into this, I had an expectation. I think it wasn't that bad. It was pretty enjoyable to watch. It did have some interesting plot points, which we'll get into. So yeah, overall, I'd say, it was an average movie, right? It didn't do anything that blew my mind, but it wasn't
Mm,
terrible. Like it had a coherent story. It had kind of like a hero's journey type thing. It did bring up some interesting concepts that reflect kind of the contemporary world. Uh, but yeah, it was kind of, I'd say like it's like a good 6 out of 10. But now that I've watched the entire trilogy, like yesterday and the day before, compared to them, compared like in if you don't judge it on its own and you judge it comparatively to the Matrix trilogy, namely the original Matrix, it's more of like a 4 out of 10 because the set pieces and the fights were freaking amazing in the trilogy. Jeez, like it was
I
like
agree.
watching it. Oh my goodness.
I agree.
It must have been mind blowing.
And that's I know. Okay, fine. I know we're starting with the goods and stuff, but this movie didn't feel like a Matrix movie. It felt kind of like fan fiction in a way. But what I did like about it though was the expansion of the lore of the Matrix movies,
Hmm.
particularly the civil war of the machines versus machines, everything which happened post Matrix Revolutions. And I think that was a really interesting concept, but they never really go anywhere with it. They just sort of mention it that there was like a civil war between the machines because they didn't have enough energy to power the Matrix or whatever because so many people had been unplugged after the Matrix Revolutions. They talk about how the machines uh, have kept Neo in the Matrix, and they sort of gloss over the fact that well he died in the third movie and they sort of brought him back to life. And
They have the technology. They could rebuild him.
yeah, I mean, I guess sure.
I mean, the scene of them being rebuilt was pretty gruesome, and
Yeah,
it was one hell of a scene. I mean, like they didn't gloss over it that much. They were like, we literally just rebuilt you from scratch, and it was really hard.
so from what I remember of the Matrix Revolutions, Neo loses his eyes and
Hmm.
Trinity, she gets like impaled by like I don't know, four pipes or something. It's like, yeah, they're pretty much dead. But other than the expansion of the law, what I did like was the Morpheus character. In this movie, he is a program which was built by Neo. He
Yeah.
was a really cool guy. I actually quite like I quite liked his take on Morpheus and what his demeanor and his mannerisms and stuff. It was nice. In the movie, they sort of Neo programs him to be sort of like a hybrid between Morpheus and Agent Smith in a way.
Hmm.
And he starts off as an agent, and I thought that was pretty cool. But then again, they never really do anything with the Morpheus character. Like he has a few cool lines of dialogue and stuff, but I like the guy who played him. I thought he was really charismatic. I thought he did a good take of Morpheus. Uh, I'm trying to think what else did I like about the movie. Well, the self-aware meta. We can get a lot into the self-aware meta of this movie
Oh
with
yeah.
Warner Brothers pumping out a sequel to the movie, and how they reference that like quite on the nose in the actual film itself. What do you
Here's the
think about
thing,
that?
though. Here's the thing. So the way I see the Matrix trilogy is that you have the original Matrix, right? Which was kind of like this self-contained unit. It was it had a start and an end, and you could have just stopped there and just have like an amazing movie. But they just kind of dumped this whole like amazing like backstory and lore. And there's some question. It's just like, what if like the war ends, right? And so I guess Warner Brothers was like, come out with a sequel. I kind of see it in my notes
Hmm.
where I have the first movie. I have like, what is this, 50 lines of notes, and then Reloaded and Revolutions combined have like 20. So I kind of like to look at it as, the original and the sequel split into two parts. And the original was packed to the brim with symbolism, meaning, analogy, allegories, like all this stuff. It was just packed to the brim. While the sequel, that's the two-part sequel, was more of like an action adventure type story, right? It was
I
it
thought there
was
was a
kind of
lot of symbolism in the second and the third movie as well, like with the Jesus symbolism and stuff,
yeah, but I feel like
especially with the architect.
I I feel like it didn't have the same amount of, it didn't have the density. It didn't
Hmm.
have the same density of symbolism as the first one. Yeah, like all of this, well, like it had a lot of these memorable scenes, action scenes, which I like. Not everything has to be mind-bendingly hyper intelligent, symbolism like every 2 seconds. And that's what the sequels were. It was just fun. While the first one was more like you gotta think hard about every moment because
Hmm.
there's a lot of thought put into them. And then there's like the cool sequels
Yeah,
as
and
well.
that's the thing. That's the thing with the original Matrix movie was that they just thought it. People
Hmm.
just thought it was like like an action movie, like a really cool looking action movie. And I think that's and honestly, that movie
Yeah,
sort of
that
changed.
wow factor.
Yeah, it sort of changed movies forever in terms of how action sequences are made and the set designs and the costumes
They had
and
a lot of line work. It wasn't like a average action fight or like fight scene where it cuts a lot. Honestly, like it's so good. Like it's such a fresh breath of fresh air seeing all that. They had fight scenes in Resurrection, but I don't even remember much of them. I remember there was that fight in kind of like the old warehouse.
hmm.
I At the time I didn't know who the freaking homeless guy was, but now I know it's the Merovingian, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is the
Yeah. Oh
Merovingian.
my god. I
It's
was just
like
like,
he
what?
like why did they bring him in the movie? I mean, they could have had like
I
literally
I,
so
I like to know how he's doing, so I'm glad. Like
I
so
mean,
I know how he's doing
they
now.
just brought him in for comedic relief, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
It didn't make any sense as to why they would
Resurrection
have him.
in terms of tone was far more goofy, right? That's why it kind of feels like a fan fiction because it feels a lot more goofy
Yeah,
compared
like
to the
that
ones.
scene where where he tries to fly and then he's just like, nope, that's not happening. There's nothing groundbreaking in terms of anything in the movie. It just, if it was released as a standalone movie which had nothing to do with the Matrix, I think it would
Hmm.
have actually been fairly successful. Like it could have been just a commentary on how uh movie studios like to just get like pump out cash grab movies and sequels, just sequel baiting and nostalgia baiting and stuff. And I think it would have done better if it weren't a Matrix movie. But because it's tied to the original franchise, I think that's why a lot of people don't really like it because it doesn't flow like how the previous movies used to flow. It's missing the color palette, it's missing the action, it's missing a lot from the previous movies in itself, right? Yeah, I think that like that warehouse sequence and that the scene afterwards where he fights with Agent Smith, I think
Hmm.
those two were like the best action sequences. But speaking of Smith, what did you what did you think about Agent Smith? I'm curious.
So Agent Smith starts off as like this. I mean, even in the first movie, he was a bit deviant, right? He doesn't want to be in the Matrix. the movies, they stressed how he's like kind of like the opposite. He's saying it all the time. He's like, even in the last fight scene, he's like, light, dark, stuff like that. And I was just like,
Two sides of
okay.
the same coin.
I'm just like, I'm still trying to think about that. Like, what does that even mean?
Well, I'll give you my thoughts on Agent Smith. Firstly, the actor, I don't remember his name. More power to him. I think he's fine as an actor. It's just the material that he was given and the fact that he's playing such an iconic character. I think that just worked against him because inevitably, did you see what I did there? It's inevitable. He's gonna be compared to Hugo Weaving. Hugo Weaving was fantastic as Agent Smith. Like he brought that, tonally uh, dense character to Agent Smith, which this guy just
Yeah.
doesn't bring. I mean, he says things like OMG and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, to myself, Hugo Weaving's Agent Smith would never say things like that.
Yeah. So the Agent Smith in the previous movies, he considered every word very, uh,
He was very
you know,
slow when he spoke, right?
he's slow and he spoke, but he's
he
very like,
he's
he
he's very
considered every word. It
meticulous. Yeah,
was,
he's very meticulous when he's speaking. Yeah, I know what you mean.
yeah, he had like this interesting style of speaking, which
Mhm.
was completely missing with in Matrix Resurrection. It's almost like he just gave up being cool. Like
Yeah, he was just so cool, and when he was so calm and composed, but at the same time, like the Agent Smith from the first movie was so freaking terrifying. Like if this guy had to
yeah,
walk up to you and have the conversation that's similar to the conversation which they had with Neo in the first movie where they sew his mouth shut, like you would be terrified of that guy. With
and
this
it doesn't
guy,
have to be.
he's more like
Yeah,
cocky. This guy, like he's more
yeah.
like cocky and like sarcastic and stuff, which it's not really Agent Smith. Like if they were going to go down the Agent Smith route, the least they could do was to like have the mannerisms of Agent Smith played out similarly to how this guy played it out. Like with Morpheus, I can sort of forgive that. This was not truly Morpheus in itself. This was like a program version of Morpheus, but I don't think they should have even had an Agent Smith in this. I don't know how much of the story would have been impacted with this Agent Smith gone, but still.
I think it doesn't have to be Hugo Weaving in order for there to be an Agent Smith, because we have evidence of this. Because in the trilogy, especially in the last movie, you had one of the Agent Smiths kind of like take over one of the humans. He got unplugged, like he like
Oh
unplugged, and
yeah,
then went
yeah,
back to the
yeah.
real
That guy,
world,
I forget his
and
name.
he tried to
Yeah.
kill Neo in the real world.
Mm.
And him, you can tell that's Agent Smith in the way he talks, and I'd argue it was way his performance was way more unnerving than like Hugo Weaving's performance of Agent Smith.
I
I
think
was just
yeah,
like,
you nailed it
that
on the head,
was
dude. That was yeah. If they had this guy playing Agent Smith in this movie, I think he would have done a fantastic job. I mean, it's just the way that, like the character talks, the way he speaks, how he moves, and his demeanor, right, and like just the tone of his voice, like all of that is just missing from this character, and
no,
yeah, like even in the warehouse fight sequence, like he introduces himself like he's leaning up, drinking a Starbucks coffee up against a wall. I mean, it's so strange, like, and it didn't look like Smith. It just looked like another character just with the name Smith. Like that's it really. There was nothing more to it besides that. Going back to the self-aware meta, what do
mm-hmm.
you feel about the way they handle that?
Yeah, so it's very like it's self-awareness, the sort of self-awareness is very delicate stuff, right? Because if it's overdone, it just becomes kind of extra. But if it's done tastefully, then it's a nice, interesting bit of commentary. I still have no idea what to think about it. I have to like sit down and think like what would have been a good version of this movie, right? Like, what would have, but then again, it's like, you know, it's hard. I don't know. Like, I didn't hate it. I didn't hate it. I know some people think they should have just like not included that. Like, it's like kind of extra. And it's like beating, it's a bit, you know, some people might think it's like overbearing.
Yeah, it's overdone. It's overdone completely. It's overdone to the
Yeah, so
point where they actually reference Warner Brothers as the parent studio. The parent company wants them to make a sequel to the Matrix trilogy, and they're going to do it with or without them. So, I mean, I chuckled to myself both times, and I saw the movie twice, and I chuckled to myself both times, like, dude, that's super on the nose. And you know what? I would let that fly as well if it was just like mentioned one off. But then, they go back to, the nostalgia baiting, where they actually show sequences from the previous movies, to the point where Neo walks into a room and they're playing on a projector the initial sequence between him and Morpheus in the first Matrix movie,
yeah.
where he takes the red pill.
So like
And
the more, yeah, like honestly, like the whole movie really felt like they're just kind of like bringing back like everything goes kind of like the same plot points as like the first movie almost.
yeah, I think, I'm fine. I was fine with the Matrix video games. With the fact that Neo, I think that was a really cool idea, that in order to generate enough energy, he needs to be put through some circumstance where he's, in sort of a mental state of trauma. And the more trauma he has, the more energy he produces. So by giving him this ability to sort of remember the Matrix for what it was, in the format of a video game, and by constantly having him get so close to discovering that this is not the real world, but then yanking that away from him and putting him back to where he was, that state of trauma and pain. I thought that was a really cool idea,
Yeah.
that they had. And they
That's
could
like
have.
the new Matrix system, right? Like
Yeah,
we've
exactly.
been
And
told that originally it was a perfect utopia, but that the human mind is incapable of accepting that fact. And so it kept
mm,
trying to mentally wake people up out of this world. So
mm,
it failed. And so instead they created a world where there's actually misery and suffering. And then that kept people more, you know, that kept people's brains more adjusted to this world and accepting of it. And
right.
then now it's like, actually, people don't care about what's real and what's not real. People care about the fiction and the story, right? If you create a fiction that they could get involved in and immersed in, then that is what's going to keep people, not only like accepting of the simulation, but also, uh, generate more energy. So I thought that's a nice take on like the human condition, especially nowadays with, political
Divide.
division.
Yeah.
And yeah. And so that's like a nice commentary on that. I think the analyst, he was very like, he specifically mentions how, people believing in these fictions is kind of like, people don't care about the facts. They care about it's all about the feelings, right? And
I think that's one thing they did well as well. The analyst, in particular, as a replacement to the who was the previous guy, the architect. So there are things in the movie which do work. The Morpheus character, the analyst character, the expanded lore of the civil war between the machines and the between both sides for the machines. The ultimate story, the which is formed over here, is the love story between Trinity and Neo, which, in my opinion, even in the original trilogy, they play it out to be, Neo and Trinity, like, oh, he loves her and stuff, but I never really saw that in the first movie as well. They just sort of fall in love at the end of the movie, and it's you just sort of got to accept that, yeah, okay, cool, I guess they're in love right now. They could have focused on other elements. They could have made the entire movie about the civil war with the machines. They could tie that in with the fact that Neo's trying to escape, and he's going to have a few machines from the machine world actually try and help him escape. But they've gone down this route of Neo and Trinity, the love story between them, and the fact that they need both of them to power the city and stuff. And the stakes never seem too high in the movie. it just there was a whole bunch of things over here which had to happen clearly because this movie had to be made. It sort of exists,
Here's the
and
thing
that's it.
though, i- in terms, so like, you know how I said there's the original movie and then there's the sequel, right? The sequel
Mm.
is more action focused and kind of focuses on the lore and kind of kind of wrap up the overall story, while the first one's very focused on the symbolism and analogy.
Yeah, I think this. I
So
think the with the sequels though, the reason why I said this, there's a lot of symbolism in the sequels. To look at that, you have to look at the architect in the sequels, and especially in Reloaded,
mm,
and the stuff that he says about this being the sixth iteration of the Matrix, and
yeah,
the illusion of choice, basically. That
yeah, that was
was
like an
the
overall theme, I'd say. The
yeah.
illusion of choice. I think, is that in my notes? Yes, the illusion of choice. I don't
it's
know,
it's a
like
it's a
it's
very
very
deep it's very deep. That's the thing, like
too deep for me.
so I guess that's what we have to go with, right? It's very deep. The original trilogy
I
in
know
particular was
there's
very
a lot of analysis that's been done here by like a lot of people. I purposefully did not watch them just
mm,
so that I kind of have like my own thoughts on the matter.
right.
I'd say that there's a different dimension that I brought up, and that is the trans allegory in the entire Matrix series. But the reason why I have it kind of in my head split between the original and the sequel, and of course Resurrection as its own thing as well, is because if the first movie, or I watched the first movie, almost all my notes is about how uh there's a lot of trans allegory here, right? And then the sequels, that gets like almost disappears. Like it focuses more on the action. But then Resurrection, it brings that back. It kind of focuses back on that trans allegory. And with it that over, and I thought watching Resurrection, I was like, oh, they're really like ham-fisting these trans allegories. And then I watched the first one, I'm like, holy shit, this whole movie's a trans allegory. So I've watched it, and there's a lot of these things where it's like, when he hears of Trinity, and then he finally sees her, he says, "Oh, I thought you were a guy." And she replies, "Most guys do." So here's another thing, right? He meets the kids, right, that are with the Oracle,
Hmm.
and these kids are like younger, and they have like the gift of like manipulating the world, understand that they're the Matrix. He looks at it, what would you think if you're being told that you're the one, right? And then you show up and there's these kids who are like a couple decades younger at
Bending
least.
spoons.
Yeah. And then he shows up, he's just like, Oracle asks him basically, like, do you think you're the one? And he's like, I'd argue he kind of thought, like, probably not. Like, it's probably one of these kids. And then I thought back to like some interviews I've seen with trans people, and when they transition, they sometimes regret not realizing it sooner, right?
Mm.
Because when you transition later in life, actually, it even mentions it multiple times, the blue pill people, right? It's Morpheus actually says it. So he says that there's a rule that up to a certain age, they don't unplug people, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's hard for them to let go, right? They've become, too adjusted to their world. And he's seen it happen. That people went back, right? Uh, and so, yeah, like, trans people kind of, if they transition later in life, it's harder for them because they're grown adults, and they've have this network of friends, they have a job, their entire personality is based around their like previous identity, right? So
Mm.
there's a lot of regret, especially when it comes to like, oh, if only I transitioned earlier in life, right? I'd grow up to be like who I really am. And that is like, it's just everywhere in the original movie. And there's,
Are they trans, by the way? The Wachowski brothers or sisters?
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
now they're sisters. that in the first movie they were brothers, but they had, I guess, kind of like, they were kind of hiding their identity because it wasn't really accepted back in the day,
Right, right.
obviously. And so they made this movie, and they kind of appealed to the underground trans community with like all these, like, with the kind of aesthetic going and everything. I kind of realized that there's like, so like the people who are part of the Matrix, they could be awoken at any moment, but they're part of the system, therefore they're the enemy, right? So it's like either us or them. And we see in Resurrections that gets
Hmm.
broken down. It's like we've got, like, it changed, the meaning of that has changed. And that
Hmm.
kind of reflects kind of the trans acceptance in our contemporary time right now.
Hmm.
You have the machine civil war. That's more like, okay, now there's actually acceptance in society, and some of these machines are on our side,
Hmm.
right? There's allies now, and that is kind of where I saw all of the hidden meaning there, is around
Hmm.
this sort of trans allegories, which
Yeah,
is something
there's a
that,
whole there's 100 different ways you can read into the original films
yeah, it's
almost.
like stuff like that. I'm just thinking about it. I'm like, whoa, what the hell?
It's
And
very
so from,
smartly written though. That's the thing.
yeah,
It was all very, very smartly written. Someone like myself, I was what this the original Matrix came out in 1999. I was 9 years old at that point in time, maybe.
hmm,
I saw it maybe when I was 11 or 12. I didn't understand any of these metaphors or allegories or
yeah.
symbolism or anything like that.
Well, yeah, I don't think anyone did, and
You
I think
know,
that's what Matrix Resurrection kind of points out. It's like nobody got that,
mm,
and that's fine. But now their entire legacy rests on bullet time, uh, sick action fight scenes,
right.
the Matrix, getting red pilled, whatever that means, freeing your
Mm,
mind. And we could see that how red pill is being used to kind of, by like completely delusional people, to think that they know how they're really like, and not like these blue pilled sheeple. It's like
mm.
COVID is not real. I took the red pill. It's like, Jesus, like what is going
Yeah,
on?
it's very
So it gets
interesting, right? Like,
misconstrued. It gets
mm,
misconstrued, and that's why this movie kind of had that commentary on that. It's like people don't care about facts; they care about feelings, and
mm,
all. And so, like, then, and so you see like Neo just like in complete disappointment and dejection, as like, they all just sort of don't understand what the movie was about. At least that's how I'm seeing. I'm seeing the Wachowskis vicariously through Neo in that kind of meta scene.
right. So
That's kind of how I'm
I
seeing it.
think we can both agree that the meta stuff is actually it's pretty deep, the meta stuff. Even if they, hit you on the head with it like a bunch of times in a number
That's
of really
that's
awkward
why I
ways.
don't hate it, because it's not just there for fun. It's there because I feel like it actually represents what's going on, like,
Mm. But
in what it's representing.
the subtlety of the first movie, let's talk about the first movie. The
Way more
subtlety of the
subtle.
first, yeah, exactly, right. So
Way more subtle.
it's not like, yeah, I get it, right? It's super easy. Like they never actually reference something outright, like how they reference, Warner Brothers Studios outright in this movie, right?
Hmm.
They had other ways of doing it, right? And I think that's really intelligent. I think that's really smart. That's not to say that it wasn't smart to have similar sort of symbolism in this movie as well, but at the same time, it was just so ham-fisted and just so on the nose that it sort of comes across as very, I don't know, it's like a parody. That's what it is.
Yeah,
It's
but
really
it
like a
also doesn't
parody.
even it also doesn't even like sit in those analogies very much. It's trying to like have it's trying to I think the focus here is, there's a bit of deep stuff going on. There's a bit of fight scene in action, and kind of the overall, but it's mostly just, I feel like it's mostly just the Wachowskis, trying needing somewhere to vent, like
Yeah,
that's
it's like
kind of the
giving
impression I got.
they probably, and I wouldn't be surprised if Warner Brothers actually told the Wachowskis, like, look, hey, if you're not gonna make this with us, we're gonna do it ourselves. And Lana Wachowski must have been like, you know what,
Let's
I
destroy this series.
let me just do it myself, because at least that way I am, I'm the one, calling the shots and not some other random director, right? So I think that was probably what might have happened. I don't know. But if that is the case, and she intended this movie to be a giant, fu to, to big Hollywood studios who do this shit all the time, then more power to her. This movie is gonna go down as like some sort of cult hit in the future, I would assume.
Yeah.
But yeah, for initial impressions overall, I would give this movie I would give it a 5 out of 10. That's what I would do. I would give it a solid 5 out of 10.
Just that
Um,
averages my 6 out of 10 and my 4 out of 10. So yeah,
Right. So yeah, I
agree.
would give it a 5. I would give it a 5 out of 10. Interesting concepts, interesting pieces in terms of the lore. I liked Morpheus, the analyst. I think it was nice seeing Neo and Trinity back together again. But overall, the movie did seem to drag in places. It had very forgettable action, forgettable soundtrack. We didn't get into the soundtrack as well, but so when I go to the gym, sometimes I throw
Mhm.
on the Matrix soundtrack, particularly the
The
Reloaded
Matrix
soundtrack.
soundtrack is
Yeah,
just so amazing.
particularly
Oh
the
my.
Reloaded soundtrack, like the Chateau fight sequence and the highway chase
The
scene.
last fight sequence, that
Mm.
song plays. Here's the thing, I remember watching it the first time and that song plays.
From which
That
movie is
song.
this?
So the first Matrix, the
Mhm.
last kind of like the song where they're entering
Oh, that
uh
building, and
the
they have
building,
the bunch of guns.
and the fight scene with Agent Smith in the rain in the
Mm.
last movie,
Mm.
or in Revolution.
That they had this orchestra type of
Those
soundtrack.
I
Yeah.
heard those soundtracks not for the first time I heard about them was not in the movie. It was actually elsewhere. I think because The Matrix was such a hit that like I heard these soundtracks in like fan made animations or uh
Hmm.
videos that had like some kind of epic fight scene, and then
Mm.
that song would play, or either of them would play, and then I
The,
hear it in The Matrix. I'm like, yo, shit's about to go down.
Yeah, the soundtracks in the original movies were pumping, man. Like I swear to God, like I go to the gym and sometimes I throw on the soundtrack from the highway chase scene in Matrix Reloaded. You know the one which goes a pana pa pana pa pa pana pana
Yeah.
pana. And it's like, and it has this crazy drum sequence, and it even the Burly Brawl fight sequence where Rubber Neo is battling all the Rubber Agent Smiths in that horrible CGI mess.
Yeah,
Um,
like honestly, like we hype up the fight scenes, but like some of them, especially in Revolution, were like the
in
CGI
Reloaded,
wasn't like.
I think in Reloaded as well. It was at that point in time
Yeah,
where CGI wasn't really it was still in its early phases of adoption.
yeah,
The prequels to Star Wars had just come out, and people are still sort of finding their footing in terms of how much CGI they need to use for it to look realistic. I remember
yeah,
even back
but
in 2004
yeah,
when I saw Reloaded, I looked at that fight scene and I was like, this looks like a cartoon. Even at that point in time, the CGI was quite bad, but all the in-camera shots with Neo and doing the fight sequence, and Keanu Reeves, dude, he's a bloody awesome action star. Like he does a lot of his stunts himself, and I guess that's also why in this particular movie they didn't really have any too memorable action sequences, because Keanu Reeves, I mean, the guy is like what, he's close to, he's maybe in his late 50s right now, I think. His body probably doesn't move the same way it used to, 20 years ago. So I can understand in a way. Yeah, forgettable action, forgettable soundtrack, very, very, very clearly a cash grab. And Agent Smith was just a pile of dung, honestly. Not the actor. I don't.
scathing
I think.
review by
Yeah, I
Kingdom.
think. I think. It had some good parts. It had some. It had a number of bad parts, but overall, you can go to the movie and enjoy it. But if you were a fan of the previous movies, I would say go check it out. It's not as bad as a number of people are making it out to be. I don't think they're gonna make a sequel though. That's all I'll say.
Actually, to end things off, at the very end of Resurrection, they talk about making the sky rainbow. I
That's
was
like
like,
on
oh,
the
okay,
nose. That's like a really on
yeah,
the nose trans allegory right there.
yeah. But do you remember what happens at the end of Revolutions?
Oh, the sky does turn out to be a rainbow, right?
Yeah, the sky was
Yeah,
rainbow.
yeah, yeah.
So I think it was less about a trans allegory, it was more like a reference to the last movie.
Didn't think about it like that.
Yeah, I noticed. I was like, yo, what?
But yeah,
Yeah.
that's our very, very honest review. But from all the four, this is by far the weakest. So
I'd
yeah.
say so.
All right.
All
So
right.
with that being said, yeah, thank you, Anton, as well for coming back on. It's always a pleasure to have you, man. I always enjoy our little conversations. So until the next one, I'll see you when I see you. Bye bye.